also from a national party. So let me put the question to you in a slightly more expansive way. If it can't be done here because you're not in power here, can you get this done in Jaipur?
There's a historic link. After all, Mirza Ismail helped design Mysore and Jaipur. So there's no reason why people from here can't take their ideas there. We'll see. These are all, basically. I am on I'm on the. Yeah, go ahead. These are ideas that can be cross-fertilized across states, and
not only that,
it's worth exploring.
I think the examples have multiplier value. I think that's really the thing. We'll come to that. I want to ask one more question, which is a segue into what I want to ask Chetan next. But before I go to Chetan, Rajiv, one question for you. And Satya seems sort of hinted this thing, which is, and Anjali said this too, that essentially there is a set of that they're not going to make money, right? A public bicycle sharing scheme is simply not viable without state support. Public transport is not really viable without state support. The idea or that a bicycle scheme should make money, it's been around for a long time. The BMTC, in fact, for many years was proud of the fact that they made money. And it was, every transport professional would hear that and say, oh my God, this is like the absolute wrong thing to be proud of, because the way they make money, the way they are profitable is that they don't run any of the routes that are not profitable, right? So that's not a way to be profitable. So in a way, where does this thing come from? That certain kinds of choices need to be viable when in fact the subsidy for roads is so high on a per capita basis?
Well, I think a lot of this is not visible to the public. The kinds of allocations and the subsidies are not necessarily explicit. You actually go around telling people we are widening your road, we are, what's white topping it, things like that. All of these things are actually the things that you are proud of, saying this is, and that's how, and the local public says, yes, you've done a great job. So, so there's, I think, scope for much more articulation of the complexities, of the hidden trade-offs involved. And that's something that all of you, Bangalore civil society has been amazing that way at bringing up, a lot more awareness than existed pre-2000, right? This last couple of decades has been amazing in terms of civic engagement, transformation across domains. And so I think it's a work in progress, and we'll continue in that direction.
Okay, so that now brings me to Chetan. Chetan, if you could turn your video on.
Yeah.
Let me put it sort of brutally, and maybe I should ask myself this question too, partly. What's the problem we're trying to solve, right? At one level, it seems like motorized vehicles are the problem, but there's a parallel narrative that is emerging, that electric problem or that thing. And people have said often that, if you replace 1 million non-electric vehicles with 1 million electric vehicles, you might have very many of the same problems that the city now has. So, my own sense of it is a little more nuanced than electric, but, I'll let you go first to say, what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Well, I think that, I don't know about you, but the last, 60, 90 days in lockdown, it seemed like we had old Bangalore. I saw fireflies in my garden. I've seen parrots around here and, bluer skies. And that's the kind of Bangalore we grew up in. I cycle to school every day and would love to have my kids cycle. And that's something that Satya and hope we can work out. But I think the way at which we're growing is so fast that the growth has to be in a sustainable manner. So the first thing is that we've got to get rid of local pollution to get the pollution part controlled. And there, I think electrification plays a large role, because at a local level, we go to zero pollution. Even more relevant because vehicles, even with newer emission norms, are good today. But 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line, because of poor maintenance, emissions go up to 2 to 3 times more. So in real world, we have to close on the emission side. The stop and go driving is making life even worse, which is very different from maybe 20 years ago. So the same vehicle is polluting a lot more. So first we got to fix that. But then we got to also address the entire congestion side. And there I think the way we think about shared mobility, and the way we think about integration of making it more efficient use of vehicles, right? So if the same vehicle in shared can replace 5 vehicles on this area, if there's a cross-utilization of vehicles being used for delivery and passenger, because throughout the day we need that, then we can start to reduce the amount of pollution, reduce the amount of congestion too, also on the road. And the third is we're not, even if we just think of effective utilization of technology, if we really know, that 50,000 people move from one place to Whitefield every day, and we really know in real time how to use the data, we can just probably reduce congestion by 20% by just optimizing things. So I think it's not that electrics would be a very important part, because we will still have motorized transportation as part of cities, and that's going to be an essential part of it. But if we are able to focus to integrate it with the other aspects, and electrics have an opportunity that telematics and connectivity can come in, there's an opportunity to put things around a platform for a city that can integrate these resources. And I think there's also a new set of new forms of transportation, or new forms of solutions coming in cities, where from day one they can go electric, right? So if I think of fleets, if I think of first mile, last mile, there's no reason why from day one they can't go in. And if we start to give consumers an end-to-end experience of electric, they will move towards that. And that means if the guy comes from a metro, which is electric, and then goes 2 kilometers to his work, which is also electric transportation, right? And the whole journey is electric end to end, but also connected. Then you're helping probably solve much more than just one problem for a city. And I think that's an opportunity that we have in Bangalore to do right and really make a huge impact.
Sure. I mean, the way I sort of talk about it is to say that what vehicles, and if we can keep increasing the number of electric kilometers that each vehicle does, then we're starting to get value out of going electric. But I want to come back to something that you quickly passed over, because this could be something else that Rajeev can take forward. You said, this distinction between vehicles that are for cargo and vehicles that are not for cargo or for persons is a little bit of in my view, it's actually an unnecessary line for a lot of things. But I think historically, the regulatory environment and the registration environment for vehicles has made a strong distinction between what is a cargo vehicle and what is not a cargo vehicle. You could blur that. There's no reason why, for example, a courier could not be delivered by a cargo vehicle or a non-cargo vehicle. And scooters, for example, are doing both kinds of deliveries now. This definitions of vehicles, I suspect, are going to change in the future. And what is it that we could go to the government and say, think about these definitions and think about why these differences are needed anymore?
I think it's a very simple one. We've been working with the government for a while on getting green plates for electrics, and that's finally been implemented. So
I have the first one, by the way.
Yes. So you have white and black and white, you have a host of colors depending if it is what application it is. Maybe there's a possibility, which would be an easy thing to say, listen, if you have a green plate, which is anyway electric, there's no boundaries on usage on this area. It could be for commercial or personal. It could be for load or for passenger. And as a result of this, because of such a simple implementation, and you can get more utilization now, it could be very meaningful. So someone could be for 4 hours, put their own bike on a bike share platform and have others use it, or have someone delivering pizzas at one point, or even look at it as a bike taxi at another portion, or use it for personal on a weekend if he wants to do it. That would really help in a simple way. And I think this can be done easily with the new green plate. It was difficult earlier. So it could be done both at a central government level and then deployed at a state level. And this is something that I believe can help the industry. In post-COVID times, the biggest part for us is going to be utilization rates, right? Everyone is really going to struggle. Things like this can help us on the right path, and a simple solution to the problem of multi-use of vehicles.
Of late, I really think of you as the energy guy more than the vehicles guy. And that's for a reason, because of all the things that you've been telling me. Talk to all of us about energy. That is really, I think, unlike petroleum or diesel, electricity is something that everybody has in their house, and it's there in every building. In fact, I always say the world's largest charging infrastructure already exists. It's just facing inward. If you make it face outward from every building, you'll just have what you need to have. But I think this has implications. I saw your thing with IOC, was it? IOCL recently. And I was wondering, is public charging infrastructure, does that make sense? Is that ever going to make money? Is that, why? I have electricity in my house. Why should I go to a charging infrastructure point to get electricity?
Yeah, so I think that having been on EVs for 25 years, I felt that there have been three key challenges: that the cost of electrics were very high. People were really concerned about range anxiety if they run out of charge. And people weren't happy with the long refueling time of 4 to 6 hours for regular charge and maybe an hour for fast charge. And I felt that unless you address these issues at scale, you won't have deployment. The second big part was to look at 2- and 3-wheelers and buses, which really constitute 85% of the transportation in India, and also 85% of the pollution being created and the miles being driven on this front. So the idea is, if we focused on, let's take for a second 2- and 3-wheelers, and then we get to buses, can there be a common solution like an Android approach across all platforms, that by separating the batteries from the vehicles, you can now get vehicles to be as cost effective as internal combustion engine vehicles? And if you can swap them in a couple of minutes, then you address both the range anxiety and long refueling time. And now if a person is going electric, they don't care, because when someone buys an electric, they want to make sure that they're using it for the corner cases. What if that weekend I had to drop my wife off, then my kid, then do my other extra journey, and on my scooter, which I may want to do over 100 kilometers, and that may not be possible without a charge. And so I felt that the swapping solution would be right. And this means that a city has to come together, and players, right? It's all about how do you create common of infrastructure that 10 fleet providers can use, 10 OEMs can use. It can be easy as to access as a petrol bunk. And so therefore, we've today tied up with an IOCL where we can put stations in there, tie up with the city's electricity company to see how we can integrate it. So if infrastructure comes in, always a chicken and egg thing, but if infrastructure comes in, it makes a big difference. Bangalore has 85 LPG bunks, and it took the city probably 10 to 15 years to put that together on this front. You could put up 100 swapping stations in 6 months in the city to replicate that, which means all of a sudden a consumer is not concerned that they would run out of charge and go in there. So I think that the infrastructure has a large play to get wide scale adoption, especially on the 2- and 3-wheeler side. I'm not looking as much as a personal transportation, but definitely on the shared front. And that's why I think there can be a large role of infrastructure. While someone does 30, 40 kilometers, he can go home and plug in, but think of it at scale. What do you do for 200,000 auto drivers? Do they have the infrastructure? What do you do about the delivery boys? What do you have to do about a lot of people who may not have the infrastructure to charge and want to go electric? That's what I see a large scope for simplified, open architecture, interoperable platforms.
Anjali, that I want to come back to you on something that Chetan just now said, that when we first began planning the city many decades ago through the planning agencies, one of the things that sort of everybody took for granted was that rich people would have cars. But we increasingly, through the shared economy, have a situation where very large numbers of people now use the car as the means to their livelihood. They may not be wealthy enough to own a car for themselves, but the car is their instrument of a livelihood, right? And they don't live in houses with parking lots and things like that, right? They don't really have the space for the cars in their houses. Is this kind of emerging new direction in mobility? How do you capture this back in the planning space?
It's possible to capture that within the planning space. Even the planning vocabulary, I would say, has matured, at least at the policy level, where there is the need for a mobility plan to be brought in, and this has to be plugged into the land use plan. Actually, the mobility plan brings in mobility and land use together. That it hasn't been done is a different question, but there are policy directives which give us that space to be able to bridge this and bring it into the plan. But how effectively we are doing it or whether we are doing it or not is a different question. We are not. At this point in time, especially for Bangalore City, this has not been attempted or has been attempted. Unfortunately, once the whole plan, the land use plan came out, and then there was a thought about a mobility plan. So it's already, it's an afterthought. But if you look at the policy directive, there is a means that provides the bridge to bring it in and account for these things within the larger plan, the statutory document.
And you think they can actually do this in the current? I mean, one of the other things that I will, maybe we've spoken about this before.
I can't hear you, Ashwin.
In India, throughout the country, anybody who owns a piece of land,
Ashwin, sorry, you'll
can
have
go to the government and say, I want to build on it.
Ashwin.
This is actually not that common, but people around the world, okay, is it interconnected?
Yes, you'll have to repeat that question entirely.
Can you hear me
because
now?
we didn't hear any of it. Yes. Yeah, you're audible now.
Okay, so my question was, in India, anybody who owns some land can go to the government and say, I want to build on it.
Yeah.
That kind of seems odd that, this is not the way people actually build elsewhere in the world. Elsewhere in the world, the carrying capacity of a region or a neighborhood is assessed and permission to build is restricted to those areas. It seems like we are getting applications from all over the place. One from the northeast, the next one from the southwest, one for a giant community, one for a really small house. There is no order to any of these kinds of things, that we get, applications from each of very different places. And we just respond to each application in a very technical way. We don't even look at the overall picture. We go and create communities where water is scarce and other resources are scarce, and we ignore places where water and other things are more abundantly available. Is it time to say, just because you own some land doesn't mean you have the right to build on it?
I would say I would differ a little bit. Perhaps we will get into other issues if we say don't have the right to build on it. But I would say that right to build has to be steered in line with the larger vision or the larger thought of how the city should grow. And that thought itself has to be very clear, right? Where do you want the city to go? How do you want the city to go? And right now, that visioning itself is so divorced from what people are thinking at the ground level. So there is no bridge over there. So therefore, as somebody has also asked in one of the questions, that the city, is there a vision for the city? There is a vision for the city. However, whether that vision is by the city, we don't know. It is definitely not. If you ask me my personal opinion, no, that vision has not been constructed by the city. To get back to your question, yes, you could frame it differently to say that if you have a parcel of land, instead of saying, you have the right to do it, but that right is tempered and steered within a larger understanding of how the city should grow or how that particular neighborhood should grow. Forget the city. The city will incrementally, the neighborhood will add to the city. But at least there should be one vision for the neighborhood itself, and how it is meant to grow.
This brings me to one more thing, Rajiv, that, one could take away from a conversation like this. Let's say that, 3 lakh people move to the city each year, and that's roughly correct. I think 300,000 people have been moving to the city each year for the last several years, which means that we need to have about 75,000 new building plan approvals of some housing unit approvals. But there is a distribution to this. Really what you need is about 10,000 units for people who are well off, about 35,000 units for people who are middle income, and another 30,000 units for people who are low income. This is what you need. But the applications for building plans are all coming from rich people.
Okay, so basically I would also add that you also need affordable rental housing for migrant populations as well, migrant workers. We've seen that very starkly during this lockdown. Now, a lot of construction happens without permission, so that's probably why people are, in certain socioeconomic categories are not applying as much. But more than anything else, the planning arrangement right now is, smaller sites rather than for denser constructions, and there's a lot of change that's required out there. And that change has to fit in with this larger planning process of being able to work and live close to one another in such a manner that you don't need, today in Bengaluru, the majority of trips are for work or for education, and they crisscross the city and they go right through the city. And so many of these things will change if we change the nature of what kind of buildings do we want to allow, and whether we want to keep expanding in 20, 30 sites, in sort of a sprawl, or whether we want to bring people together in more denser concentrations with access to work, access to utilities of various kinds, parks, sports facilities, and other kinds of amenities, and bicycle lanes and electric vehicle infrastructure.
Yeah. Satya may have reordered that sentence a little bit and put the bicycles in before your and then
there you go.
After your and. But my question was really to go towards and really, Satya, stay online, Satya, because really I think this is the question to ask, that it's because you don't provision for the housing for the lower income groups and the middle income groups that you're not provisioning for their mobility either. That if you sort of began by thinking, so for example, one could say that out of 75,000 building plans that are approved in the next year, 18 months, whatever, there has to be a ratio, that you just cannot give away land that is meant for a wider set of people to use for rental or non-rental housing. If you just give it away to people who can own it instead, it puts tremendous price pressure for everybody else. It costs more than 70 lakh rupees to buy a single 30-40 site and build a small house on it today. How many people have 70 lakhs? Our whole planning regime seems to be for the top 3 or 4% of the population. Satya, I really want to, you've sort of worked a lot in one neighborhood, in Sanjay Nagar in particular, trying to say, all these problems that show up on the street, the walking problem and the cycling problem and the vendors who need to make a livelihood and all of these kinds of things that are clashing on the street. Really, all of these clashes are about where people live as much as they are about where they work and how they get to those places, right? What is so difficult about saying, even last week BDA was auctioning 300 corner plots. Frankly, you shouldn't be auctioning corner plots. But BDA thinks there's lots of money in corner plots and they go actually auction them. That money is very much lesser than the price that the city pays for making that mistake.
No, I agree with the thing. I don't want to conflate the aspirational goals and the planning issue that we have. Again, going back to saying that transportation is a derived demand, it is important to have built it right, but not having built it right, we also have a correction in the name of transit-oriented development, which we can do, which is to try to reconstitute areas to run it around transit, because when we gave permissions or when we planned it, we couldn't plan it properly. So there is an allowance, I think, in planning also to have certain amount of organic way of developing things. But what happens is, again, going back to density and sprawl and all those things, that's something you and Anjali can talk more about. But what I'm saying now is there is an aspirational issue even among the middle class or the lower middle class. If I spoke to the gardener who I went and asked and said, I'll give you a bicycle lane, I'll keep you for, I'll give you all these facilities to keep you safe. He said, fine, I'll take it. But from your questioning, it appears that you want me to stick to a cycle. The only reason I go and earn and get a nice job is to get a motor vehicle and upgrade myself. So the aspirational goals that we have set is coming back and saying, you are the guys who set these aspirational goals. Why are you coming and telling me not to follow them? Why aren't you giving up any of these things, or at least making certain trips to set a standard to say, I'm not going to use this for these trips. I'm going to use the motor vehicle for certain other trips. We all seem to think in binaries. Most people, I go and tell them, get a bicycle and ride it. They say, oh, you want to dispossess me of my car. That's the binaries they think in. They're not thinking of percentages, saying that I can do 20% of my trip on a bicycle. I'm not asking you to go to Chennai on a car, but I'm just saying, why don't you use this for your neighborhood or your commute? So working on attitudes is a bigger problem for me than actually allocating money. We talk, if there is money out there, but it's not within the window of acceptability or popularity for the political economy. That's where they're saying, you guys need to shift this window. It's not up to us. So most of the time I'm working on saying, what is your ability to take up a bicycle and give it a shot? more people are doing it. How do we get that? And a lot of it is around behavioral. And this is why I was looking at Vision 1 Crore also. You talked about the problems with unit profitability and public bicycle sharing. It is true. And the reason is micromobility suffers from not being able to empathize with that form factor. There is no acceptability of that form factor. None of us, a lot of people who are being shuffled around or have been in cars, they might easily prefer a rental shared car rather than getting onto a shared bicycle, because there is fear of riding, there's fear of so many things, there's fear of not being able to maneuver that small little thing in traffic. So ownership is something I'm again going back to and saying ownership will lead to more bike rentals. We are cracking it the wrong way. It's easy for you to crack a car and a motor vehicle because you have 80 lakh motor vehicles out there and most people are familiar with it, but not with a bicycle or one of the scooties and things like that. There should be a curve of adoption happening. So my Vision 1 Crore is saying a bicycle costs less than a cell phone. There is no reason you shouldn't be owning one. The least it will do is build empathy, and you'll ride around at least when your gym is not open. We need to build empathy. And I'm saying at least 1 crore people in this city need to have a bicycle. They should be able to, I'll get them to ride it. That's the next challenge. It's a typical sales funnel. If you have 1 crore, you'll get 20 lakhs. If you have only 20 lakhs, you'll not even get 2 lakhs out on the road. So I'm trying to think of getting the acceptability, getting empathy, getting 1 crore going on the road, and then come back. And the next time I go on a metro or a bus, I'll easily pick up a micro mobility vehicle because it's right there and I'm familiar with it. I know how to use it and I won't be afraid of it. That's my angle into it. Planning, yes, but attitudes, bigger problem. Nobody wants to solve it. I would like to solve it.